Mammalian skin is also made up of two major tissue layers, the epidermis, the outermost superficial layer of the skin, and it is consists of epithelial tissue, and we know it protects the skin from aberrations, and it reduces water loss. The epidermis is lying on dermis. Dermis is the connective tissue, and the dermis, it is responsible for the structural strength of the skin. In leather industry, this is the dermis that is making leather of the animal, and the epidermis is removed and dermis is preserved by the process of tanning in the tanneries for the production of the leather. The these two layers, epidermis and the dermis, they rest on another connective tissue layer that is called as hypodermis. Hypodermis is not part of the skin or integmentation, but it connects the skin to underlying muscles or bone. The epidermis of the mammalia is stratified squamous epithelium, and it is separated from the dermis by a basement membrane. As we know, there would be a basement membrane beneath epithelial cells. The epidermis is not as thick as the dermis, and the epidermis, because it is epithelial in nature, it contains no blood vessel, and it is nourished by the diffusion from capillaries in the connective tissue, that is dermis. So dermis is responsible for nourishment of the epithelium, as we know previously. Most cells of the epidermis, they are called keratinocytes. Keratinocytes gather a protein called keratin, and they become hard. They protect the epithelium from aberration, and it also protect the loss of water. There are few other types of cells of like melanocytes that are having pigment in them, and then Langerhans cells that are part of the immune cells, and Merkel cells that are for the sensation, they are nerve endings, so they are for touch and pressure. Cells that in epithelium are produced by mitosis. We know the epithelium, it is highly regenerative tissue. Cells, they divide very fast as compared to other tissues. So these cells that are present in epidermis, they come from the cells from the there are, because we said the cells, they are in layers, so the cells, they come from the deepest layer, and they get mature and they reach to the superficial or outermost layer, where they, when they get old, they get mature, they die, and they slough off, they get removed from the skin, and then new cells, they take their place. So outermost cells in this stratified arrangement, they protect the cells underneath, and the deeper cells, they replicate and replace the cells on the outermost surface. So along with this movement, the cells, they also go from the various changes in their shape and chemical composition. So the cells, they go through a process called keratinization. As we know, keratinization mean the cells, they get filled with keratin protein. So the cells, they would die eventually, and they are called as cornified cells. So the uppermost layers, they are cornified layers of the epidermis. Keratinization is a continual process. However, we can, from top to bottom, we can see different layers of the cells that have different shapes and different levels of keratin deposit in them. So we can classify epidermis of mammals into different layers or strata. So these strata or layers, they are stratum basale, the deepest most layer, On that there would be stratum spinosum, on that stratum granulosum, outside of that stratum lucidum, and then is stratum corneum, the outermost layer. So these number of cell layers, they vary from mammal to mammal and the different areas of the skin. The deepest portion of the epidermis is a single layer of cuboidal or columnar cells called stratum basal. Basal mean it is at the base, it is the innermost layer of the uh, epidermis, and beneath it would be basement membrane, and after that connective tissue would start, and the rest of the strata or the layers of the epidermis, they are present on top of this layer. So this is the basal layer. It is also called as stratum germinativum. Stratum germinativum mean this layer of the cells, it divides very fast. The cells in it divides and give rise to new layers of the cells. These cells, they have special type of connections to their neighboring cells. These connections, they are called as desmosomes. So these cells, they are attached to each other through desmosomes. Desmosomes are the fibers that are extended out of the membrane of the cell, through which the cells, they get attached to each other. And when these desmosomes, they are present at the base of the cell and connecting cells to the basement membrane, then because they are only contributed by the cells, because basement membrane is non-living material, it cannot contribute any proteins, so the protein that are contributed by only cells, so they are called as half desmosome or hemidesmosome. So hemidesmosomes are present between cells and basement membrane. So these cells, they get attached firmly to their base or basement membrane through hemidesmosome, and these cells, they are also attached to each other through the desmosomes. These desmosomes that are present in the keratinocytes, they are internally supported by intermediate filaments that are part of cytoskeleton. So these desmosomes, they are protein that are extended out of the cell membrane, but they are internally linked to the cytoskeleton. The stratum spinosum is the layer of the epidermal cells outside of the uh, stratum basal, and it is consists of 8 to 10 layers of many sided cells. uh, so these cells, they are pushed to the surface, they get flattened, desmosome get break, and new desmosomes are formed. During preparation for microscopic, the cell usually shrink from one another except where they are attached by desmosome, causing the cells to appear spiny, hence the name stratum spinosum. And additional keratin fiber and lipid filled membrane found bound organelles called lamellar bodies are formed inside the keratinocytes. A limited amount of cell division takes place in the stratum spinosum. Mitosis does not occur in the most superficial layers of the stratum spinosum. The third layer of the epidermis from bottom is the stratum granulosum. It is consists of 2 to 5 layers of flattened diamond shaped cells that have long axes that are oriented parallel to the surface of the skin. Its name is derived from the non-membrane bound protein granules called as keratohyalin that accumulate in the cytoplasm of the cell. Keratohyalin are actually the granules that are made up of keratin protein and few other protein that help in the cornification. Cornification, we know, is the process in which the a lot of keratin is deposited in the cell, and then there would be a programmed cell death of the cells in epidermis. There are also found lamellar bodies. Lamellar bodies are the structures or the vesicles that are found in the um, epidermis of the skin, mostly in the stratum granulosum. They are also found in stratum spinosum, but in stratum granulosum they are widely distributed, and they help to transport lipids toward membrane. These lamellar bodies are also found in alveoli of the lungs, where they transport surfactant towards the cell membrane. But in case of epidermis, they are present in stratum granulosum, and they help to transport the phospholipid towards membrane. This phospholipid would help to make a water barrier for the skin. As we know, the outermost layer or the uppermost layer of the skin, the stratum corneum, the cells shed from that. So these lamellar bodies, they also release components and enzymes that are required for skin shedding in the uppermost layer. These lamellar bodies, they are thought to be formed from Golgi apparatus. In most superficial layer of stratum granulosum, nucleus and the other organelles, they degenerate and the cells start to die. But keratin fibers and keratohyalin granules, they do not degenerate. The stratum lucidum appears as a thin clear zone, so it is called as stratum lucidum, and due to its clarity, it is present above the stratum granulosum, and it is consist of several layers of dead cell, and their boundaries are indistinct. Keratin fibers would be present in them, and they appear to be transparent cells. Stratum corneum is the uppermost layer or outermost layer of the epidermis, and it is composed of 25 or more layers of dead squamous cells that are joined by the cell junction called desmosomes. So when these cells they get mature, eventually the desmosomes they break up, and the cells they fall off from the skin, or they desquamate. The process would be called as desquamation. So excessive desquamation of the stratum corneum, or the cells of the stratum corneum of the scalp, is called dandruff, and normally the process is unnoticeable when the desquamation is in normal level. The stratum corneum, it is consist of cornified cells, which are dead cells that have gathered the keratin in them, and they have developed a protein envelope also. So keratin, we know, is a mixture of keratin fiber and keratohyalin. Keratohyalin are the keratin protein plus certain other proteins. So these protein envelope and the keratin, they help the cells to have structural strength in the stratum corneum. So the keratin, it could be of two types. It could be soft keratin, it could be hard keratin. The soft keratin, if it is present, then the skin would be soft, and the hard keratin is present in the structure like nails, hooves, horns. So these hard keratin, they are more durable, and the cells that contain these keratin, they would not fall off from the skin, or they would not desquamate. Those cells that contain soft keratin, they would desquamate. Around these cornified cells are the outermost layer of the epidermis. The lipid layers are present that come from the lamellar bodies in the skin. So these lipids, they are helping the skin to maintain its impermeability for various compounds. As we already know, the dermis is connective tissue, that contains fibroblasts. Fibroblasts are the cells of the connective tissue that produce fibers. So these fibroblasts would be present. A few adipose cells. Adipose cells are the fat cells, and macrophages that are helping in the defense system of the connective tissue. So these macrophages, they are like the macrophages in the blood, that are the white blood cells. So collagen is the main connective tissue fiber, but elastin and reticular fibers are also present. The collagen is type of protein. We know that it is the protein that is white in color, and it is rope like protein that is strong when we pull it, when we stretch it. It would not break, but it is inelastic. It would not come back to its original length when we stretch it. But elastin protein, it is not that strong. It is yellowish in color. It is spring like. When we pull it, it would recoil. It would come back to and to its original length. So the reticular fibers are actually collagenous fibers, but they are making network. They are interconnected to each other. Few layers of collagen are uh, connected to another few layers of collagen through collagen fiber. So these are reticular, mean making a network. So they are making sheet like structure. So the dermis, it is made up of, it is having mainly three types of cells: fibroblasts, adipose cells, and macrophages. And it contains three types of fibers, that are collagen fiber, straight collagen fibers, and then reticular fibers, the collagen fibers that are interconnected to making network, and then elastin fiber that are made up of elastin protein, and they could recoil. Adipose cells and blood vessels are very rare in the dermis, we know, as compared to the hypodermis. Hypodermis is actually not part of the skin. It is the another layer that is present, layer of connective tissue that is present beneath dermis, and it is connecting the skin to the muscles. We know epidermis does not contain nerve ending, hair follicles, smooth muscles, glands, and lymphatic vessels. They are but present in the dermis. So dermis contain nerve endings, hair follicles, smooth muscles would be present, and glands and lymphatic vessels are present in the dermis. The nerve endings are varied in structure and function. Free nerve ending for pain, itch, tickle, and temperature sensation. Hair follicle receptors for light touch, and Pacinian corpuscle for deep pressure, and Meissner corpuscle for the ability to detect simultaneous stimulation at 2 points on the skin, and Ruffini and organs for continuous touch or pressure. The dermis is divided into two layers: the deeper reticular layer and the superficial papillary layer. The papillary layer derives its name from projections called dermal papillae, that are the extension extending toward the epidermis. The papillary layer is loose connective tissue with thin fibers that are somewhat loosely arranged. So they are also called as loose connective tissue, because the fibers in papillary layer, they have many spaces between them. The papillary layer, it contains blood vessels that supply the overlying epidermis with nutrients. They remove waste products, and they help to regulate body temperature. These papillae are actually responsible for the production of fingerprints and footprints. The reticular layer of the dermis is composed of irregular connective tissue. Irregular mean the fibers, they are not oriented in one direction. They few of the fiber could be in one direction and other could be at any other angle on those layers. So these are making sheets that are strong in all directions. They are resistant to stretching in many directions. The hypodermis is connective tissue that is acting as a glue to attach the uh, skin with the muscle and bones beneath. Hypodermis is made up of loose connective tissue with collagenous and elastin protein fibers, and it contains same type of cells like dermis, fibroblasts, adipose cells, and macrophages. It is also called as subcutaneous tissue. It stores about half of the body's fat, and it functions as a source of energy, insulation, and padding. It is the hypodermis that determine the total fats in the body. So if we have to determine total fat in the body of a person or an animal, we can pinch the skin at various at a location, and then measure the thickness of the fold of skin and underlying hypodermis. So the thicker the fold, the greater would be the amount of total body fat, as the half of the body fat is present in the hypodermis. So it is a good indicator of the total fats in the body of a mammal. The accessory skin structures in mammal include hair and hair follicles, smooth muscles, and the sweat and sebaceous glands, nails, hooves, horns, and many others. So if we talk about hair, the presence of hair is one of the characteristic that is common to all mammals. If the hair is dense and it covers most of the body surface, then it is called as fur. In mammals, hairs are found almost everywhere on the skin except few structures like palms, soles, lips, nipples, part of the external genitalia, and the distal segment of the fingers and toes. If we see structure of the hair, we can divide hair into two main parts, that is shaft and root. The shaft protrude above the surface of the skin and the root is located below the surface of the skin. The base of the root is expanded to form the hair bulb. Most part of the root and the shaft of hair are composed of columns of dead keratinized epithelial cells that are arranged in three layers: the medulla, the cortex, and the cuticle. The medulla is the central axis of the hair. It consists of two or three layers of cells containing soft keratin. Medulla has soft keratin. Cortex forms the bulk of the hair. It consists of cells containing hard keratin. The cuticle is a single layer of cells that forms the hair surface. The cuticle cells contain hard keratin. So hard keratin, we know the keratin is a protein that is tough protein because it contains the sulfur in it that makes disulfide bridges or bonds, and the keratin, it has most disulfide bonds as compared to other proteins. So in hard keratin, the sulfur contents, they are more as compared to the soft keratin. So when the hair they get burned, the sulfur that is present in the hard keratin of cuticle and cortex, it burns and it gives the hydrogen sulfide gas that produces the unpleasant odor of rotten eggs. So in some animals like sheep, the cuticle edges of the hair are raised. They during textile manufacturing, these edges they get merged into each other and they make threads. The hair follicle is consists of two tissue layers, the dermal root sheet and epithelial root sheet. The epithelial root sheet is made up of all the layers of the skin that we already have studied, that are the stratum basale, stratum spinosum, stratum granulosum, stratum corneum, lucidum, and stratum corneum. They all are present in the uh, epithelial root sheet. Around that, there would be dermal root sheet that is made up of the dermis, that is a connective tissue. So when we pluck hair, the epithelial root sheet could be visible around the uh, root of the hair as a white material. The hair bulb is an expanded knob at the base of the hair root. Inside the hair bulb, there would be a mass of undifferentiated epithelial cells that produces the hair and the internal epithelial root sheet. The dermis of the skin, it also goes into the hair as a hair papilla in the hair bulb. It contains blood vessels that provide nourishment to the cells of the epithelial root sheet and matrix. These epithelial cells, undifferentiated epithelial cells in the hair bulb, they are also called as matrix. They give rise to new cells that get keratinized and they die and they add up to the length of the hair. So hair grow slowly by adding up the cells at the base in the root where there is hair bulb. So the hair grows in two stages, that is a growth stage and a resting stage. In growth stage, the hairs, they are grown by the undifferentiated epithelial cells at the hair bulb, and they get keratinized and then they add up to the base of the hair root. So after that, the hair growth stops, the hair follicle they get shortened, and after a resting period, the new cycle it begins, and the old hair it would fall from the hair follicle and new hair it start to appear from the hair follicle due to the division and then keratinization of the newly formed cell from the epithelial matrix at the base of the hair follicle. Melanin is produced by melanocyte within the hair bulb matrix, and is passed to keratinocyte in the hair cortex and medulla. Like skin, varying amounts and types of melanin causes different shades of hair color. So with the age, the amount of melanin would decrease. That would cause the color to fade or become white. Another accessory structure are the erector pili. These are the smooth muscle cells that are associated with the hair follicle. We know the hair follicle, they have two types of the tissue layers, the epithelial sheet and the dermal root sheet. So these muscle cells, they extend from the dermal root sheet of the hair follicle and to the papillary layer of the dermis of the skin. Normally, the hair follicle and the hair inside it are at an oblique angle to the surface of the skin. They are not straight at right angle to the skin, but when the erector pili muscle they contract, they pull the follicle and they make them into a position perpendicular to the surface of the skin, and the hair they uh, stand on end. So these produce uh, areas called goosebumps. These goosebumps, they may are the contraction of erector pili muscle. They occur in response to cold or to frightening situation. In animals with the fur, the response of the goosebumps, it increases the thickness of the fur, and when it is in response to cold temperature, it would help the fur to trap more air beneath it, because the hair of the fur would stand, and then there would be more spaces beneath those hair, and they would trap more air, and these furs they would become better insulator. But in frightening situation, the animal, because would have the standing hair, so they appear larger, the animal body appears to larger, and it would be more furious, so it could deter an attacker or predator. Human, because they have few hairs on their skin, so there would be hardly any benefit from this goosebumps. They may be only the evolutionary trait to get good goosebumps during cold or frightening situations. In skin, mainly two types of glands, that are sweat glands and sebaceous glands, are present. Sebaceous glands are located in the dermis. They are derived from epithelial tissue, epidermis, and they are going deep into the dermis. They could be simple, they could be compound. If they are simple, mean only one invagination would be present, and if they are compound, it mean they would be bundle of invaginations in one gland. And these glands, they are alveolar glands, they are not tubular. Tubular mean tube like structure, alveolar mean they are like alveoli, they are grape like structure. So these are alveolar glands that produce sebum, that is oily white substance that contain lipid. So these sebum, they are stored in the cells, and when these cells they die and they excrete out, the sebum would come out. So these glands, they are called as holocrine gland. Holocrine glands are those glands that their cells as a whole die with the release of the substances. As we know, these are exocrine glands, most both the sweat glands and sebaceous glands. So exocrine gland mean they have contact with their external surface, so they have ducts to release their products on the surface of the skin. So these ducts, they are connected to the upper part of hair follicle, from which the sebum oils the hair and skin surface. So sebum prevents drying, and it protects against microorganisms. Few of these sebaceous glands in few areas like lips, eyelids, and genitalia, they are not associated with hairs, but they open directly onto the surface of the skin. We should know that the exocrine glands, they are duct gland, and sebaceous and sweat glands, they are examples of these exocrine gland that have ducts. So these duct gland or exocrine gland, they could be apocrine, they could be merocrine, they could be holocrine. The merocrine glands are those glands that would release only their secretion, and the apocrine glands uh, release the apical surface of the cell. It get slough from the uh, cells, and it go with the secretion. And in case of holocrine gland like sebaceous gland, the whole cell would go into the secretion, it would die, it would get detached from the gland and it go into the secretion. But sebaceous glands are holocrine, as we know. The sweat glands, they are merocrine glands, mean the only secretion would go off from the glands. So these merocrine glands, they are few of the glands, they could be sweat gland could be apocrine, mean their apical surface of their cell would slough off with the secretion. But most of the sweat glands, they are merocrine. So these merocrine glands, they could be simple, mean the only one invagination from epidermis would go into the dermis. We know it, and we have to keep it remember that all these glands, they get arise from most of these exocrine or endocrine gland, they arise from the epidermis. So in case of skin, sebaceous gland and the sweat gland, they also arise from the epidermis. They go deep into the dermis. And in case of sweat glands, the invagination would be only one, so they are simple. And then these invaginations, they are in the form of tubes, they are not in the form of bulb like in sebaceous gland. They are in the form of tube, and the tubes, they are not straight, they are coiled. So these glands, sweat glands, they could be called as simple tubular coiled glands. And these coiled portion, they would produce the sweat, that is a fluid that is isotonic to the blood, and it contains some salts like sodium chloride, ammonia, urea, uric acid, and lactic acid, and most of the part would be water. But when this fluid moves out of the coiled portion, most of the sodium chloride goes back, and nearly hypoosmic fluid would leave from the that is a little thinner fluid that is having less salt concentration than the blood, would come out from the duct that would evaporate from the surface of the body and is called as sweat. So in case of the high temperature, the sweats, they cool the body. And these sweat glands, they are mostly present on the palms of the hand and the sole of the feet, and not present in all animals. Human and horses, for example, have these sweat glands in their hairy skin, but dogs, like, they don't have any glands on their skin. They cool their body through painting. The apocrine sweat glands could be present in mammals on throughout their body. And these apocrine gland, mostly they release in these mammals, they release the um, uh, scents, uh, so they would help in the communication. Other skin glands include the ceremonous glands and the mammary gland. The ceremonous glands are modified merocrine sweat glands, are located in the ear canal. So they produce ear wax or cerumen. So these protects the this cerumen is actually the combined secretion of ceruminous glands and sebaceous gland, that is oil from the sebaceous gland. So they together make an earwax that protects the eardrum from dirt and small insects. The mammary glands present in most of the mammals are modified apocrine sweat glands, and they produce the milk to nourish the young one. The distal ends of primates digits have nails, whereas most other mammals, they have claws or hooves. If we talk about nails, they protect the ends of the digits, and they also aid in manipulation and grasping of small objects, and may be used for scratching. A typical nail is consist of the proximal nail root, and that is under the skin, and the distal nail body that is coming out of the nail root, and that is the free part of the nail. The nail root is covered by skin, and the nail body is the visible portion of the nail. The skin that is covering the nail root give rise to stratum corneum, the cornified epithelium that grows onto the nail body and is called as aponychium, and or cuticle. And beneath the nail body is the hyponychium, that is again stratum corneum, it is thick region of the stratum corneum that is grown from the epithelium. The nail root is made up of nail matrix and nail bed. Nail matrix the is the epithelial tissue, and it is having stratum basale, and that give rise to the cells that form the nail. A small part of the nail matrix, the lunula, could be seen through the nail body as a white crescent shaped area at the base of the nail. Nail as a whole is stratum corneum. It contains hard keratin, and that is making the nail hard, and it is growing from the nail matrix and nail bed that are the epithelial in nature. They give rise to new epithelial cell that get cornified, and they grow the or add up the length of the nail. The nail, claws, and hooves are similar structure. They are homologous. A nail is flatter and has a curved edge instead of point edge as the claws have. Nail is that is to bear weight is called a hoof. It is big and it could bear weight would be called as hoof. So the claws and hooves and hair, they may grow at some instances and then stop and then restart their growth. The claws found in the bird of prey, that are the birds that hunt, like eagles, kites, they are called as talon. All these structures have outermost epithelium, and then innermost is the that is dermis or the connective tissue. So here we can see all these blue color uh, surfaces. They are epithelial in nature, or they are epidermis, and internal would be the dermis or the connective tissue. The colors in the animals could serve two purposes mainly, that is warning or to hide from their predator or prey. So when they are for warning or recognition, these colors they would be very sharp, bright, and they would change dramatically. And if they are for hiding, camouflage, they could be very cryptic or hidden type of colors. So these colors they could be produced by two ways, mainly due to presence of a color pigment in the skin, or they could be structural colors. Structural color are those colors for which color pigments are not present in the skin or integument, like in insects, in birds mostly. These colors they are produced by the physical structure of the surface tissue that reflects certain wavelength of lights and does not reflect others, so they produce color patterns. So these structural colors they could be present in the beetles, in butterflies, some fishes, and birds. So more common form of colors in animals are pigmentous color. So pigments are also called as biochrome. These are the large molecules that reflect light rays. In crustacean and ectotherm vertebrates, the pigments are contained in large cells with branching processes. They are called as chromatophores. These pigments they could be concentrated in the center of the cell, where they would be very uh, tight bundles, so they would not be visible even. But when they spread on the whole surface of the cells, they would make a continuous covering of the color on the skin. In case of chromatophores in cephalopods, that are the mollusks, the cells that contain or chromatophore that contain the pigment. They are sac-like cells and they are surrounded by muscles. So when these muscles they are contracted, they stretch the whole cell into a pigmented sheet. And when the muscle they relax, the chromatophores they would become small sphere, and they would change the color of the cephalopod mollusk. The color pigments would include melanin, carotenoid, or they may be some other products like purine, that are guanine, rather than the color pigments. Melanin is a group of black or brown polymers responsible for various shades of the skins in animals. Carotenoids are the color pigments that are yellow or red, and the uh, purine or guanine they give silver color. Melanin are present in melanocyte. Carotenoids are present in the xanthophores. Xanthophores gives yellow color, so they are present in like the frogs. And iridophores, they are also present in some of the frogs. Iridophores would contain guanine or some other purine. They are giving silvery color to these animals.